They say you never forget your first love, and I know for me that's true. It happened when I was 21 years old. From the moment I arrived in New York City, I was smitten with this place. New York in 1986 was not like it is now. It was still gritty and grimy and angry. It was an island of misfit toys where freaks ruled. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was someplace where I belonged. I lived in this absolutely terrible apartment. It was a 5th floor walk up on St. Mark's Place with plaster falling from the ceiling, and the only way to turn on the oven was to hit the gas and toss in a match and jump back and cross your fingers. But I didn't care. I claimed my identity as a New Yorker immediately upon arriving. I loved the way that we walked straight ahead and with purpose and against the light. Oh, see, you're that person. It's all good. I loved the way that we talked all at once and overlapping and interrupting. I loved the way that we ate our pizza by the slice and split it in half and standing at the counter at the pizza place. I just couldn't imagine any other life. And so like any 21-year-old in love, I vowed to belong to New York forever. I vowed that we would be together in sickness and in health, like that time that a friend who worked for this city got me a pair of no standing online required tickets to Shakespeare in the Park. I went to see Tracy Ullman and Morgan Freeman in Taming of the Shrew, but I also found out that night that I have terrible allergies, and I spent 3 hours in the middle of Central Park snurfling and sneezing and blowing my nose into napkins that were passed my way by strangers. I vowed to belong to New York for richer or poorer, but really that just meant for poorer, because I never had any money. I learned how to dye my hair at home. I learned where to get the best falafel on the cheap, which to this day is Mamoun's on McDougal Street, right? Isn't that the best? I know. I learned how to get cheap rush tickets to Broadway theater, so I saw Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis with the original Broadway casts. I was sitting literally in the absolute last row of the house, but it didn't matter because I was in the room and I lived in the greatest city in the world. By 1991, I met Andrew and fell in love for real with a human. I got married for real to a human. And the city, which had once been so wonderful, got to be a little harder. We moved to the Upper East Side. We had Emily in 1997. The streets that were so wonderful to walk in my chunky boots at 23 got to be a lot harder to navigate with a stroller. And I couldn't really enjoy a lot of the things that I always loved. My favorite thing had always been going to concerts at Madison Square Garden. Back in the day, concert tickets were pretty cheap. And I could go to 8 straight nights of the Grateful Dead. I could see Paul Simon and Billy Joel and Elton John, and my first and forever favorites, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Madison Square Garden is a great place to see a show because no matter how crappy your tickets are, it's really easy to move around and move down. It was great. But now I have Emily, and raising a kid in the city is really expensive. Like her preschool tuition was more than my college tuition was. And I couldn't hang out with the other mommies who went to Pilates all day because I didn't have a nanny. It just got tough. And New York and I were on the rocks. And finally, by 2001, when Jonah was coming around, we had to break up, New York and I. My family moved to the city, moved to Connecticut from the city. But like a lot of couples, New York and I would still get together sometimes for a quickie. And I would go in for a day or an overnight, maybe with a friend or maybe by myself, and I would eat my favorite foods and shop at my favorite stores and live the life that I once imagined would be mine. And that's how I found myself that weekend in August 2019 in the city and on my own. It's sort of a little miracle that weekend. The thing about New York in August is it empties out on the weekends as all the New Yorkers leave town and go to the beach or the mountains or whatever. So there's not a lot of lines for things. But the reason they do this escaping is because it is inevitably disgustingly hot in the city in August. But this weekend, it's not. It's kind of temperate and low humidity. Like the city doesn't even stink. And there I am on my own. I head out in the morning. I get a coffee and a sesame bagel with scallion cream cheese. I go to the Met because there's an exhibit of rock guitars that I've been dying to see. And when it's over, I call my friend Alec and I ask Alec, does he want to hang out that evening? There's this new David Crosby documentary that I want to see. And of course, I can't see it in Connecticut, but it's playing at the Angelica. Does he want to meet me? And he says he's tied up that night. But do I know that, in fact, that very night, David Crosby is playing a free show at Lincoln Center? And I'm like, well, I do now. So I head over. I start at Rosa Mexicano across the street, where I have myself a little Paloma at the bar, and I talk to the strangers sitting around me. And then I cross the street and I sit on this brick wall outside at Lincoln Center and I talk to Andrew on the phone while I watch the fountains do their thing like I'm Sharon Moonstruck. And then I go to get online to go to this show, right? And it's a problem. I get right to where the entrance of the park is, but the line starts at the entrance and goes all the way down the block to Amsterdam Avenue and around the corner. I can't even see the end of the line. And I kind of think to myself, like, there went that. Looks like I'm going to the Crosby documentary, right? But the line at that very moment starts to move. And there's a little gap between people. And I do this kind of, like, I know it's shitty, okay? But I do this thing that you can only do if you're by yourself. And I slip right in, right at the front of the line. I cut the whole line. And I walk into Damrosch Park. I'm one of the first ones in there. And I walk right up to the front where the fifth row, there's one seat sitting right in the middle. And I look at this guy and I kind of point at the seat. And I look like this and I smile real nice. And he waves me in. And I sit down and we've got a little while till the show starts. So I talk to the guys on either side of me. This guy who waved me in, he's like my age. That's Mike from Long Island. And he's taken the train in from Great Neck to see the show that night. He's a longtime Crosby fan. Okay, great. This on this side of me are these two guys. This is Joe and Emmett. And they are literally young enough to be my children. And not like I'm a teen mom. They're literally young enough to be my children. And I talk to them and I ask what's their story. And Joe says he's lived in New York like a year, maybe two. He's doing whatever he's doing. Emmett is his friend from home in Indiana, Pennsylvania. I don't know where he's from. And he just got to New York like 2 weeks before to be Joe's roommate. And I say, how do you like it here? And he's like, well, I think I do. Like, I don't have a job yet. I don't have any money. I'm crashing on Joe's sofa so far, but I like it here, he says. Okay. The music starts, and the show opens with a song I don't recognize and something new. And then immediately we get to all the songs from my East Village days. Wooden Ships and Deja Vu and Almost Cut My Hair. And the sun starts to set in this spectacular display of orange and fuchsia and violet. And I look over and I see Emmett, who is looking up and looking around and soaking it all in. And when Emmett catches my eye, I see it. Emmett is beside besotted. Emmett has fallen in love in an instant with New York City. And I also know, looking, that Emmett thinks every night of his life in New York is going to be just like this. Low humidity, no stink, free tunes, friendly strangers. And I don't have the heart to tell him how wrong he is, because who shit talks somebody's first love like that? And besides, I figure there's plenty of time for Emmett to be wrong tomorrow morning. Tonight, right now, in this moment, Emmett is so right, and he and I are both just where we belong. Thank you.